We have our minion over here. Baruch Hashem. Okay. Let's see. Good Tavach. All right. So I did want to go over the Taisvis that we mentioned yesterday, Friday, because it's a very important Taisvis, which touches upon a lot of interesting halachas with regard to and different opinions, I should say, in the laws of Sudas on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. So let's, I guess that would be a good place to begin. Well, maybe we should just mention what the Gemara said. The Gemara did mention that if a person messes up and forgets the Ya'aleh v'Yava on Yom Tov, or if he gets Ritzei on Shabbos, so those are cases where a person has to repeat the benching. However, if you forget Ya'aleh v'Yava on Rosh Chodesh, you wouldn't need to repeat the benching. And the reason is because on Rosh Chodesh, you don't need to have a meal. But on Shabbos, you do. In Shabbos and Yom Tov, you do need to have a meal. So the Gemara had seemed to have some type of a contradiction because it says you have to repeat the Shmona Esrei if you miss Rosh Chodesh, but in benching you don't have to repeat if you miss Rosh Chodesh. And the Gemara answered that logically, that Rav Nachman said, let's try to figure this out logically. And he said, well, benching is something you don't have to eat on Rosh Chodesh, and Yantiv, and however, davening, you do have to definitely daven. So if you have to daven and you mess up, you got to repeat it. Eating, you don't have to eat, which means benching is not a necessity on Rosh Chodesh. So you messed up in benching, you missed out the Rosh Chodesh. It's not a necessity to really eat a meal. So if you mess something up in that meal with regard to Rosh Chodesh, you don't really have to repeat the benching because benching doesn't necessitate, Rosh Chodesh doesn't necessitate a benching. Therefore, you wouldn't have to repeat it. Taisvis starts off with a question that Rosh Chodesh is from the days that a person is not allowed to fast. If you're not allowed to fast, then you do have to eat on Rosh Chodesh. And if you do have to eat on Rosh Chodesh, how could our Gemara say you don't have to repeat the benching if you mess up because you don't have to eat? You do have to eat. That means you should have to repeat the benching if you mess up on Rosh Chodesh. And how could our Gemara use this as a way of differentiating between eating and davening, benching and davening? If the truth is you really do have to eat. So the first point Taisvis makes is that you don't have to eat bread, but you do have to eat. You do have to eat, which is what we saw over there in the source that Taisvis brings from. He brings from a source that Rosh Chodesh is from the days you're not allowed to fast. His source is Megillas Tainus. So, and his answer is that source is correct. You do have to eat. You just don't have to eat bread. So our Gemara is talking about eating bread and benching. That benching is not a necessity on Rosh Chodesh. It's a nice thing to do, nice to have a special meal on Rosh Chodesh, but it's not a necessity to bench because you don't have to necessarily eat bread, but you do have to eat something. Now, I should mention that what is the source of Taisvis? So the source of Taisvis is this document called the Megillas Tainus, which is quoted in a Mishnah. There is a Mishnah in Tainus that quotes this booklet called Megillas Tainus. It has over there a lot of days that were considered like semi-holidays that you weren't allowed to fast. What days you're not allowed to do a eulogy on, and a mournful eulogy, I should say. And it has a whole list of days that are prohibited to fast because in that time, a lot of miracles had happened, and they wanted to make a memory of each of those miracles. So therefore, there were certain days that they now, the thing is that a lot of those days we don't really keep. We only keep Hanukkah and Purim. but we don't. After the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, we stopped keeping a lot of those days. Now, Rosh Chodesh is an interesting holiday because there is a biblical source for the holiday, and the question really is the prohibition of fasting connected to that? So, if you say that the prohibition of fasting is connected to the fact that Rosh Chodesh has a biblical source as a holiday, then that doesn't fit with Tosfos. Tosfos brings his source from Megillas Tainus, which is seemingly a rabbinic source over there that you're not allowed to fast on this day. If Tosfos was basing it on the fact that Rosh Chodesh is a holiday, according to biblical law, and therefore you're not allowed to fast, he wouldn't quote the Megillas Tainus. And the fact that all the other holidays there, Megillas Tainus, we don't keep, is because they don't have an origin biblically. But because Rosh Chodesh has an origin biblically, therefore the prohibition of Rosh Chodesh does remain in effect even after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So what comes out is that there's a prohibition of fasting on Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is called a moyed, it's called a holiday. It's forbidden to fast on festivals. And the question that I'm sharing with you, the background information, that it is questionable if this concept is biblical, or that you're not allowed to fast, or if it's rabbinic, and it's the prohibition of fasting would only be from the source in Megillas Tainus. So that's number one. And Tosfos, we see, holds that the prohibition of fasting is rabbinic, because he's quoting it from Megillas Tainus. And we see that the prohibition of fasting on Rosh Chodesh, according to Tosfos, applies nowadays, because Tosfos is asking this question based on the fact that nowadays he's saying, what would you have to do? Should you repeat this story happened in the time of the Gemara? And we have this contradiction, and Rav Nachman is discussing it. And so obviously they're discussing this situation that Rav Nachman, let me tell you when he lived. Rav Nachman lived in the, let's say, the 5th century, the 4th century, or the 5th century. So it's way after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And he's explaining this halacha regarding not having to repeat the benching on Rosh Chodesh, but you do have to repeat in the daven. You have to repeat the Shemona Esrei if you miss out Yalav Yavai, but you don't have to repeat the benching. So he's talking about after he's dealing with after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So what he's basically saying is we do have to keep this rule. He's following the fact that it is prohibited to fast on Rosh Chodesh even after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So it's like there's two debates here that we're seeing Tosfos's view. One is if the prohibition of fasting is biblical, or if it's rabbinic. And number two, even if it's rabbinic, does it apply nowadays or doesn't it? So that's what we have. So that's gives you a little clarity on this Tosfos, which also tells you that there are other views. Now, Tosfos goes now, after he mentions that point, then he deals with the Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara in Sukkah deals with the obligation of eating in a sukkah. When is that obligation? And he says that our Gemara here seems to say that on Yom Tov, you have to eat on meals, but the Gemara there seems to imply the only obligation to eat a meal is on the first night of Sukkot. And the same thing would apply to Pesach. The first night of Pesach would be an obligation to eat a meal. The first night of Sukkot is an obligation to eat a meal. And that's what it seems like. And possibly you're not obligated on the other days of the holiday. So our Gemara seems to say, oh, if you miss Yalav Yavayan and you're benching on any of the days of Yom Tov, which means Shmini Atzeres, you miss Yalav Yavai, or if you miss it on the last day of Pesach, or you miss it on the first day of Sukkot, or the first day of Pesach, or in Chutz La'aretz, if you miss it outside of Israel, we have 2 days of holidays. So we have Simchas Torah, we have the second day of Yom Tov. All of these days of Yom Tov, do you need to repeat the benching if you miss Yalav Yavai or not? So Tosfos says from our Gemara, it sounds like you have an obligation eating meals on all the days of Yom Tov. And Tosfos says that Gemara sounds like you would have to repeat Shemona Esrei based on that obligation. Tosfos says, but the Gemara in Sukkah seems to say that only the first night you have an obligation eating a meal. If you only have an obligation eating a meal the first night, what does that say about missing Yalav Yavai? Sounds like if you miss Yalav Yavai on the other days, you would not need to repeat Shemona Esrei. So Tosfos has to explain what that Gemara really means. And he explains that Gemara means that the first night you must eat in a sukkah, but not that the obligation of eating a meal on every day of Yom Tov and every night of Yom Tov is a definite obligation. But do you need to eat it in a sukkah? Now, what are you going to tell me? Of course you need to eat it in a sukkah. In Sukkot, of course you have an obligation eating in a sukkah, right? So what does that mean? You don't have to eat it in a sukkah. But you have to eat a meal. How could you say such a thing? Of course you have to eat it in a sukkah. It's Sukkot. On Sukkot, you're not allowed to eat a meal outside of a sukkah. So you have to eat a meal in the sukkah. So you're telling me only the first night I have to eat a meal in the sukkah. In the other days of Sukkot, I don't have to eat meals in the sukkah, but I have to eat a meal, but I don't have to eat in the sukkah. How could you have such a scenario where I'm obligated eating a meal, but I don't have to eat in the sukkah? So Tosfos says, well, the case would be where it rained. If it rained, so what did I do? The first night I ate it inside because it rained. But the thing is, first night, I know that I'm really obligated in having a meal in a sukkah. So when it stops raining, what do I need to do? Go outside and eat another meal in the sukkah. How about the next day? If I eat inside because it rains, did I fulfill my mitzvah of Yom Tov? I did. Do I need to go back after it stops raining and eat in the sukkah? No. Only the first night must you eat in the sukkah no matter what. The first day of Sukkot, no problem. At night, yes, you got to go back and eat in the sukkah. By day, you got to eat a meal, but you don't have to eat in the sukkah. So how many meals do you need to eat on Shabbos? And how many meals do you need to eat on Yom Tov? So on Shabbos, you have to eat 3 meals, right? Which we mentioned on Friday, the different opinions about the third meal might have some leniencies, that you don't have to maybe eat bread. You don't have to have, first opinion was you don't have to have two loaves of bread. You could have one, according to one opinion. That's one leniency about Shalosh Shudas, the third meal on Shabbos. You need a meal, but you don't necessarily need Lechem Mishnah, according to one leniency. Another leniency was you don't even need to have bread. You could maybe have mezainis. Another leniency was you don't need mezainis. You could have fish or meat or something that you eat with bread, the main course. And the other leniency was you could even have fruit. And so there were a few different levels of leniencies that people do for Shalosh Shudas. I will tell you that in Lubavitch, they're very lenient on Shalosh Shudas. Surprisingly enough, normally they try to be very strict on, but interestingly that they seem to follow the more lenient view. And it has to do with the fact that Kabbalistically, the third meal of Shabbos is like above the level of food. We're beyond food on Shabbos. It's a Kabbalistic spiritual level on Shabbos that according to Kabbalah, the Shabbos gets holier and holier as you continue the Shabbos. It gets even like this. The day Shabbos is holier than the night of Shabbos. And then the third meal time of Shabbos, which is as Shabbos is ending, that's the holiest of holy. That's Raiva Derivin, it's called. The desire of desires. It's the holiest level of Shabbos. So because of that, it's Kabbalistically, it's like beyond food, and therefore there's reason to be lenient with shalosh physical on the physical food, because it's supposed to be more like a spiritual element at that time. But I won't tell you have to follow that. There are other opinions that you should have a meal, and you should have a meal with lechem mishnah even. So if you want to, if a person follows that, if they have a tradition to eat a meal, a lot of people are very strict on the third meal, and they have a meal with lechem mishnah, with two loaves of bread, and they fulfill it according to all views. So there are two sides of the coin there, two extremes. But Tosfos over here tells us that the obligation on Yontiv to have meals is not 3 meals, but 2 meals. So again, on Shabbos, you have a mitzvah to have 3 meals. On Yom Tov, you have a mitzvah to have 2 meals, even though the Gemara in Sukkah implies like you don't have to have a meal. It implies there like the first night is the obligation to have a meal, but the rest of the holiday, you don't really need to have a meal. However, Tosfos says that's not what it means over there. What it means there is the first night, you have to definitely eat in a Sukkah. But to have a meal, you have to have a meal, at least 2 meals on every day of Yom Tov. So that's the next point that Tosfos makes, that you would need to have a meal. If it rained, there would be a leniency not to eat in the sukkah, but you definitely need to have a meal covered Yom Tov. So after it stops raining, let's say you ate a meal on the first night, you would need to go back in the sukkah and eat a meal in the sukkah. If it rained on the day of Sukkot, on the first day, you don't need to go back and eat another meal in the sukkah, because the obligation of eating in the sukkah is specifically an obligation on the first night. But you can get away as long as you ate a meal outside of the sukkah, you fulfilled your obligation. Of course, the case is talking about that it rained and you were exempt from eating in the sukkah. Now, there is a Gemara that mentions, this is the Tosfos' next point, there's a Gemara that mentions that there was a great rabbi, Mar Berei de Ravina, which means the son of Ravina. He would fast all year long. And it implies from there that he would fast even on Yom Tov. Now, obviously, it means he ate at night. He would fast during the day. It doesn't mean that he fasted all whole year without eating anything. A person can't live. But it means he fasted during the day. But the thing is, it implies from there that you're allowed to fast on Yom Tov, right? That's what it seems. So that would seem to be a nice proof that you can fast on Yom Tov. And you see that's what he did. So that would seem to be implying like you should learn the previous Gemara that we mentioned in Sukkah, that it really means that you have to eat at night on Sukkot, but you don't have to eat a meal by day. You can fast. So Tosfos answers. He says the Ri explains that that's talking about a tainis chaloim. That's a dream, a bad dream. That according to halacha, you're not supposed to fast on Shabbos or Yom Tov. But if you have a bad dream, and for you feel you're fasting. We know fasting is very helpful against a bad dream. So if a person has a bad dream, and the way of getting rid of the bad dream is to fast. So you're allowed to fast for a bad dream even on Shabbos and Yom Tov. The reason you're allowed to, even though you're not supposed to fast on Shabbos or Yom Tov, is because it's considered for you like a pleasure. In other words, normally Shabbos Yom Tov you can't fast because you're supposed to have pleasure. But for you, what is real pleasure? It's fasting, because you know that you're so nervous about your dream, and you know that fasting is considered a very good solution for a bad dream. It's a good medicine for a bad dream. And therefore, for you, fasting would be a pleasure, and therefore you're allowed to fast on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Of course, we learned that you have to really, there's another source that says that you have to fast for the fact that you transgressed Shabbos because really you shouldn't be fasting on Shabbos, so you really should fast another day during the week to make up for the fact that you fasted on Shabbos. But you are allowed to do such a fast, and that's what it means that Mar Bereda Ravina, he would fast all year long, except, it's interesting, but one of the exceptions to his fasting, when wouldn't he fast? On Shavuos, on Erev Yom Kippur, and on Purim. He says those days you have to eat no matter what. And so what comes out is he's saying even if he had a bad dream, according to the answer of Taisus, it means it's not that he fasted all year long except those 3 days. It means he fasted whenever he had a bad dream, except if he had a bad dream on those 3 days, he would not fast, even if he had a bad dream on those days. And one of the points is that Shavuos is the day that Hashem gave us the Torah. You're not allowed to fast because even though you had a bad dream, because it's supposed to be pleasuresome the day that Hashem gave us the Torah, to show that the Torah is a pleasure. It's not a burden. Yes, Ben.
I thought that there is.
I can't hear you. I don't know why.
I thought there is no bad dream. There is just a bad translation of the dream.
Say that one more time. I didn't hear what you said.
I thought that there is no bad dream. There is only a bad translation of the dream or explanation of the dream.
So that's true if you believe that, and if you're convinced that it's a perfect dream and nothing's wrong. But if you're a little nervous inside, then it could have an effect. And therefore, it says that fasting for a dream is like a tremendous remedy. It's a huge remedy. It's a perfect remedy for a dream. And therefore, anyone that has a little nervousness, should fast, unless, of course, they're unhealthy and they take, there are obviously going to have to be exceptions to that rule. Not everyone can fast, especially nowadays. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch that our bodies are not as strong as they used to be in the olden days. And therefore, we have to be careful. Fasting could affect, we're not able to concentrate on our davening. We're not able, might not be healthy to fast and so on. And so therefore you have to be careful just taking on extra fasts. But your point is correct, that if you have no worry at all, it's not, the bad dream should not have any effect.
If you believe in God, there is no bad dreams.
But it does. But you should know that it does talk about in Shulchan Aruch about fasting on Shabbos. Yeah. So it's not totally nothing to talk about. There is a concept of bad dream. Okay, let me just mute everyone. I hear background noise here. Okay. So then the next point that Taisus says is that the third meal, and that we spoke about at length, that the third meal, there is room to be lenient, because there's a source that implies that you don't have to eat a full meal. You could just have mine targima, which mine targima we said has different opinions what it means. It could mean mezainos, like cake or cookies or crackers. It could mean pastry or fruits. It could mean maybe something that you eat bread with, like meat or fish. Something that's like a main dish. So those are a few different possibilities of shalosh shudas. And if that's true, that you don't have to eat a meal, that would mean that if you mess up and you'd skip ritzeh, you would not need to repeat the benching. And then Tosfos says, but it doesn't fit so well, because there are some sources that imply you really do need to have a meal. And one of them is that when you need to provide, a person needs to provide for his wife, it gives a certain amount of, he has to provide wheat for bread for the 3 meals of Shabbos, implying like you need to have all 3 meals are equal. And the other thing Tosfos says is, what do we learn from the man? The man is like in place of bread, right? We have the bread in place of the man. They had lechem mishnah, we have lechem mishnah. So it implies from the man that they had man for the shalosh shudas, for the third meal of Shabbos. So it would seem that that it's equal to the other meal. So he has 2 seeming sources that you would that you would need a meal for Shalosh Shudas. But there are definitely opinions that you don't, and the conclusion is that you don't repeat Ritzei if you miss it, if you skip it. Now, Tosfos does say if the fourth meal is definitely not an obligation on Shabbos. If a person has a fourth meal for whatever reason, they go to their friend's house, they decide to eat another meal, you would definitely not need to repeat the Ritzei. The third meal is questionable if you would need to repeat the benching. But therefore, you should be extra careful on the third meal because it is questionable about repeating benching. So you should be, whoever does eat Shalosh Shudas with bread, they should get themselves out of any problem by definitely making sure to bench properly. But if you do have a fourth meal on Shabbos, that would be an exception. Or the same thing would apply to Yom Tov. If you have a third meal on Yom Tov, let's say you're eating a third meal on Yom Tov, you forgot to say Yalav Yavai. So the thing would be the point is it would be question the thing there you for sure do not need. It's not a question for sure. You wouldn't need to repeat the benching because there's no obligation on Yom Tov to have 3 meals. 3 meals is an obligation on Shabbos, not on Yom Tov. Okay, so that basically covers Tosfos over here, and it basically concludes that discussion about missing something that you are either obligated or something you're not obligated, and that would make a difference if you have to repeat it. It is interesting that there is a question brought in the Shilos Tshuvos of Rabbi Akiva Eger, who questions who wants to comes up with a very innovative law. He says women are not obligated in eating a meal on Yom Tov. They're obligated in eating a meal on Shabbos because there's a comparison to the negative commandments and the positive commandments on Shabbos. And therefore, women are, even though Shabbos is a mitzvah saseh, it's a positive commandment that is dependent on time. Nevertheless, women are obligated in fulfilling all the Shabbos mitzvahs that are dependent on time. But he says Yom Tov is different. Yom Tov is a mitzvah, positive mitzvahs that are dependent on time. Women are not obligated. So he says if a woman forgets Yalav Yavai in benching on Yom Tov, they actually would not need to repeat the benching because they're not really obligated to having a meal. They would be allowed to fast. A man would be obligated repeating the benching if he skipped it on Yom Tov on a holiday. He skipped Yalav Yavai. A woman, he says, well, wouldn't need to, which is a very innovative law. It's not, you don't see that anywhere. It's not mentioned clearly anywhere. However, all the other opinions, they argue on this Rabbi Akiva Eger. They say, of course, the women are obligated meal. They're not allowed to fast. You don't see it's not brought down. And they even there's a Rambam that says that the same obligation that women have in lighting Shabbos candles, they have the same obligation in lighting Yom Tov candles, and they say a bracha, even though the Rambam holds women don't say brachas on things that they're not obligated to. So you see they're obligated even in the positive commandments of Yom Tov, not just in the negative commandments of Yom Tov. Again, women have a certain leniency on time-limited mitzvahs, and the reason for the leniency has to do with the fact that they have other responsibilities and obligations. But nevertheless, the commentaries argue, the other opinions argue on Rabbi Akiva Eger, and they say that a woman would need to repeat the benching if a woman skipped it on Rosh Chodesh. But I just want to mention it. There is such a view. It is discussed at length by the commentaries that try to question this opinion of Rabbi Akiva Eger, who was a famous halachic authority and also commentary on the Gemara. Now, the Gemara continues and starts the next piece, which is explaining our Mishnah. So if you look back at our Mishnah had mentioned the beginning of the 7th chapter was our Mishnah that said that until how much do you do zimun? how much do you need to eat to do zimun? And we had this opinion of Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir. The first opinion is ad kazayas. You need to eat a kazayas. If you eat a kazayas, eat an olive size, you can do a zimun. Reb Yehuda says, no, you need to eat an egg size. So how much bread do you need to eat for a mezumin? Either an olive size or an egg size. Depends on Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda. Now, I mentioned that this discussion really boils down to the obligation of benching, not just zimun. It's extended to the zimun obligation, but it starts with actual benching. Benching is you're obligated to bench. And here we have an opinion that says on an olive size you have to bench. The other opinion is on an egg size you have to bench. So the Gemara, I should mention Rashi over here on the Mishnah had said that how much do you need to eat that you're obligated in joining the zimun or to fulfill the obligation for the others. Because we know, of course, that you could do a zimun even with just a vegetable. But here we're dealing with leading the zimun. And leading the zimun or being obligated to join the zimun, that would be with eating either a kazayas or a kibbetza. So the Gemara here discusses this. The Gemara says, "Lememra de Reb Meir chashav lekazai." Let me tell you where we are. We're on page 49b. 49b, and we are on the first word on the line. It must be about 25 lines from the top of the page. Could you play in the other room? Thank you. So we're on about 25 lines down from the top of the page. Lememra. The first word is lememra. So the Gemara asks, lememra, does this mean to say the Reb Meir chashav lekazayas, that Reb Meir says that the size of an olive is considered significant? Reb Yehuda kibbetza, and Reb Yehuda says an egg size of bread is considered significant. Is that what they hold? And that's why Reb Meir would say kazayas with regard to benching, in regard to zimun, you need to eat that size. And Reb Yehuda would say an egg size because that's what he considers is significant. We learn, we've heard the opposite of these laws, that it's not true. We've heard the opposite, that Reb Yehuda says an olive and Reb Meir says an egg. Well, because we learned in a Mishnah in the laws of the Pesach Psachim, it says over there a person is going to slaughter his Paschal offering, and he remembered that he has chametz in his house. This is not a good situation. He was supposed to get rid of all his chametz, and for some reason now he just remembered that he's got a piece of a brownie bar or some type of Cheerios that he's got somewhere in his house that he forgot to get rid of. He just remembered that he has it in his closet or he has it in his drawer. He had put it down there for some reason and he forgot to take it, So he just remembered. Now he's on his way to Jerusalem. He's on his way to slaughter his Korban Pesach, his Paschal offering. So what's the law? And also, a similar case would be if a person left Jerusalem and he's holding with him holy meats. And he remembered that he's in his backpack, he's got some meats that are obligated to be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem. And he now took them outside of Jerusalem by mistake, it seems like. He forgot he had it in his backpack. He was supposed to eat them in Jerusalem, and he just went outside the wall of Jerusalem. So the law is that they need to be burned. So the Mishnah says, "Im avar tzoifin," if the person passed, Rashi translates this place called Tzoifim. It's a certain place, maybe Mount Scopus. I don't know. Tzoifim literally means to see. So if he passed that place, although I don't know where Mount Scopus is. Is it within the walls of Jerusalem? Anyone familiar with the geography of Yerushalayim?
No, it's just outside of Yerushalayim. It's the mountain that.
So it's just outside of the walls of the old city. Okay, so that would mean that maybe Rashi is maybe referring to that Seifim, the mountain of our Seifim. If he passed through this place called Seifim, Sarfai b'mkaimai, you burn it in its place. So, in other words, where you are, you just stop right there and burn it. The rabbis did not obligate you to go back. Now, Rashi doesn't say it means Mount Scopus. He says Seifim is a place that you could see. It's a certain place that you could see the Beis Hamikdash. It could mean, unless he means just general Seifim. See, Taisus over here makes it more clear. Taisus brings from Rashi in Psachim. He says that there's a place called Seifim, which might mean he means the same thing here when Rashi says Makam. No, maybe here he doesn't mean that way. See, Rashi in Psachim, he says that it means a place, a certain place, a specific place. Maybe there he means Mount Scopus. And here, Taisus says he doesn't like that. Taisus says, V'li nira. It seems to me that if so, it should say this measure of a place from Yerushalayim, and it shouldn't just say a certain place. Therefore, he wants to say that Seifim means to see, to be able to vision, that you could see Yerushalayim from where you are, that if you're still within the bound, within an area that you're not so far that and you could still see Yerushalayim, then then you have to go back. But if you went further than that, you cannot see Yerushalayim, you could burn it in the place where you are. So Rashi here, I think, follows Tosfos. It seems like, because Rashi here says a place, any place that you could see Yerushalayim, the Beis Hamikdash, you basically if you pass that place, you burn it where you are. If you're within that place, you could bring it back to burn it in Yerushalayim. Now, so whatever the meaning of Tzeifim is, however you want to learn like Rashi and Psachim or like Rashi and Taisus over here, but it basically means that if you reach a certain distance, then the rabbis did not obligate you to return to Yerushalayim in a certain place there, which it says where you would need to burn it. But instead, since you passed a certain place, you burn it where you are. The rabbis didn't obligate you, meaning that it's obviously we're dealing with a rabbinic obligation. And the rabbis decided that up to a certain point, we're going to force you, going to tell you, you have to make this journey back. And after a certain point, you don't need to. Now the Gemara asks, well, before that, there's few words I skipped. Ve'im lav, and if you did not pass this place called Seifim, or this area, this measure of place that is from where you could see it, if you still didn't pass that place, you should go back to Yerushalayim and burn it in front of a place called Bira, which is either a place on the mountain of the Beis Hamikdash, and where they had a lot of ashes, and they would burn there the sacrifices that were considered puzzle, or according to Reish Lakish, it's a Gemara somewhere else where we have an argument, Rav Yechon and Reish Lakish, what is Bira? Reish Lakish says the whole Beis Hamikdash area is called bira, but basically the whole Beis Hamikdash is called bira. So there's an argument what bira is between the rabbis of the Talmud. Either it's a certain place on the mountain of the Beis Hamikdash, or it means the Beis Hamikdash, but you return over there to burn it there from the Atzei Hama'aracha, from the wood that is holy, that's meant for the Mizbeach, for the altar. That's where you burn. You use that wood and you burn it. You burn your holy meat that you mistakenly took out of Yerushalayim. It needs to be burned. You either have to bring it back to Yerushalayim, to the Beis Hamikdash, or to a place on the mountain of the Beis Hamikdash to burn it, or you can burn it where you are if you already passed so far. Oh, if you're so far away, you could burn it where you are. The Gemara or the Mishnah there continues and says, until ad kama heim chayzrim. What's the amount that you have that you would need to go back to burn it? In other words, what happens if you have a tiny little amount? You have to go back also for a tiny amount. So Reb Meir says, zeh, both chametz and this holy meat, you have to go back to burn b'kabetza if you have a size of an egg. But if you have less than that, then there's no problem. You burn it in its place. We're talking about the holy meats. You burn it in its place. I didn't explain what happens if you have chametz. What happens if you have chametz? That's the other part of the Mishnah, which is if you have chametz in your house and you're already far away, and do you need to go back to burn your chametz? So the thing is that it depends how much you have. If you have, again, it's the same thing. It depends if you have a kabetza or if you don't. If you have an egg size of chametz, then you got to go back. If not, you could just be mevatel the chametz in your heart. You say, I am making it ownerless. I do not want to own it. It's not mine. I am making it hefker, making it ownerless. And that is good enough because you have now made it not yours anymore. And the rabbis didn't obligate you to go back and burn it. Now, that's Reb Meir's opinion, is kibetza, an egg. Reb Yehuda Yehuda says that the measurement is an olive size. Now, what does this mean? That is, if you have less than an olive size, the rabbis didn't obligate you to go back. If you have more than an olive size or more, that's when you have to go back. That's Reb Yehuda. Now, that does seem contrary to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says Reb Yehuda likes the size of an egg. The Mishnah in Pesachim says that Reb Yehuda likes the size of an olive, right? The names don't seem compatible. Reb Yehuda here says an egg. It's significant. What's significant? An egg size. Reb Yehuda in Pesachim says an olive size is significant. So which one is it? So Reb Yechanan says, you know what? Our Mishnah is a mistake. You have to switch over the names. It's Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda say the opposite things. It could be that when they repeated it, they made a mistake. So Rabbi Yochanan says it's muchlefesh hashita. You actually have to switch the names because Rabbi Yehuda holds that size of an olive is the main is Rabbi Yehuda's view, and the size of an egg is Reb Meir's view, and that's how you have to learn our Mishnah. So according to the new reading of our Mishnah, it would say ad kama mizamnin, until how much do you do a zimun? In other words, how much you need to eat to do a zimun, to leave the zimun, to bench, to be obligated in benching. And on this, Reb Meir says ad kibetza. Reb Meir would say you have to eat an egg size, and Reb Yehuda would say ad kizayas. Reb Yehuda says the size of an olive. So that is a way of answering the contradiction, is by saying simply we messed up the names in our Mishnah, and the proper way is that Reb Yehuda holds his number is kazayas, and Reb Meir's number is kibetza. Betza means an egg, zayas means an olive. So we've answered according to Reb Yochanan. Abaye says li'olam loy tepach. No, they're two separate laws. You don't just switch it because it'll make it more compatible. There's two separate laws. Reb Yehuda could hold in the laws of Pesach and the laws of sacrifices. He holds kazayas, but he might hold in our laws With regard to benching, he holds the laws and follows the size of an egg. They're two separate things. Reb Meir is the same story. Reb Meir says over there the size of an egg, but he holds in our halachas, in our laws of the laws of benching and the laws of zimun, the size of an olive. So what does he mean? So Abaye explains himself. Here, they're arguing about verses. And what does the pasuk say? It says, you will eat, you'll be satisfied, and you'll say grace after you'll do the grace, you'll thank Hashem, and for the land that he gave you. So what do we learn? The Meir Savar, the Meir holds, v'achalta zu achila. When it says v'achalta, it means you should eat. It means you should eat a significant size called eating, achila. V'savata zu shasiya. Drinking, it says you will be satisfied. That means you should drink. Ve'achila v'kazayas. In eating, a significant size of eating, what's considered eating? An olive, that's the amount that's called a measurement of eating. Less than an olive is called picking at. You're not eating. But the size of an olive is called eating. And therefore, if the size of an olive is called eating, so that's what it means that you bench when you eat the size of an olive. And besavata means drinking, that you're satisfied. Reb Meir is darshaning that it means that you should drink. So according to Reb Meir, what is the size that you, in order to bench? Size of an olive. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Rabbi Yehuda says v'achalta v'savata, that it says you should eat and you should be satisfied. It means you should eat an amount that could have satisfaction. Achila sheyesh basviya, an eating that could have satisfaction. Ve'ezu, what is an eating that has satisfaction? When the size kibetza, when you eat a size of an egg. If you eat an egg, there, I guess, is potential satisfaction, and therefore that's what it means ve'achalta v'savata, and that's why regarding the laws of benching, Rabbi Yehuda has a more bigger measurement because he learns v'savata, and you should be satisfied to teach us to teach us the laws of to teach us that you need to eat, and more than just what eating is, you need to actually eat an amount of satisfaction, which would be a egg size. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now let's jump to the laws of sacrifices. Hasam over there, they're arguing in logic. How much should we obligate you to go back to burn your chametz or burn your sacrificial meat that went out of its place and therefore needs to be burned? Reb Meir Savar, Reb Meir says, Chazarasai kitumasai. Reb Meir says, you know how much is considered significant? The amount that is significant regarding the laws of tumah, regarding its, when it becomes impure, that's how much would be significant. The same thing would be a significant amount regarding making you go back to burn it. Ma tumasai b'kebetza, just like the tumah, which is the measurement that it would make something tameh, that one item can make something else impure, only if it's the size of an egg. So the same thing would be returning, going back, the amount that the rabbis obligated you to return to burn your chametz or to burn the meat, the sacrificial meat that went out of its place. So the amount would be that you would need to go back for is a kibetza, is an egg size, similar to the tumah that we consider significant. For tumah, that same significance would apply to the laws of going back for burning your chametz or burning your holy meats. It would be the kibetza, the size of an egg. And Rabbi Yehuda. Now, so what does Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda savar chazarasai ki isurai. Rabbi Yehuda says, you know how much you have to go back for? that it would be the amount that would be prohibited. Ma isurai, just like the prohibition to get punished, any punishment, any penalty only comes when you eat a certain measurement. That's the measurement that would apply, that the rabbis obligated you to go back for. Just like the isser of chametz or kodesh is bekazayas, the size of an olive. Av chazarosayu bekazayas, also it's the obligation to go back and burn would be the size of a kazayas. So this is the Gemara that explains the laws of a kibetza or a kazayas, meaning the rule of when we follow, or which opinion follows kazayas or which opinion follows kibetza. We now have three cases. One is the laws of tumah, impurity. One is the laws of prohibition with a penalty. And then we have the laws of our Mishnah, which has to do with the laws of benching and zima. So and regarding the laws of chametz and the laws of sacrificial meats, it's based on the other two rules. It's either based on the laws of tumah or it's based on the laws of prohibition with a penalty, and that's how it's the two opinions. That's how you have these two opinions. Now, there's a big question on our Gemara, and the question on our Gemara is from a previous Gemara that we learned a while back. The Gemara said that in the Birchas Koyanim, the blessing of the Koyanim, it says, Yisa Hashem panav elacha. Hashem will show his, he'll turn his face towards you. But there's another verse that says, Hashem lo yisa panim. Hashem doesn't take favorites. So here it says Hashem shows his face to you, meaning he chooses you as his favorites. Hashem has favorites. And the other verse says Hashem doesn't have favorites. So the Gemara on page 20 answered this contradiction, and it said, Hashem says to the Yidden, I shouldn't consider you favorites. Hashem says about the Yidden, I shouldn't consider them my favorites. I said to bench only after you're satisfied, and they bench even if they just eat an olive size or an egg size. So I shouldn't consider them my favorites. I shouldn't show favoritism to them. So that's the Gemara that we learned on page 20. It's going back maybe 6-7 months. But we did, it was an interesting Gemara over there. It's called a Agadato Gemara, interesting insight. Now, the problem with that Gemara is with our Gemara. One thing is that it fits very nicely with our Gemara. The thing that fits nicely with our Gemara is that now we know why Hashem says those two things. He says the Jewish people, they bench not when they're satisfied, but even if they eat an olive size or an egg size. What does that mean? Which one? Do we bench for an olive or an egg? What's the answer? The answer is our Mishnah and our Gemara. Our Mishnah said, according to Reb Meir, one thing, according to Reb Yehuda is the other. So why does the Gemara over there say an olive or an egg? Because it's following both, either Reb Meir or Reb Yehuda, right? So now we understand why it said over there the olive and the egg, because it depends on which opinion you're following. Reb Meir, at least according to the version that we have in our Mishnah, Reb Meir says the olive, and the Reb Yehuda says the egg. So that Gemara is Hashem is quoting both and saying, the Yidden are so precious to me, they bench even if they only eat an olive size, according to Reb Meir, and a egg size, according to Reb Yehuda, and they even bench just for that. So, of course, I'm going to show them favoritism. Now, the problem that our Gemara has with that Gemara is that, according to that Gemara, what's biblical and what's rabbinic? It's biblical to bench when you're satisfied, right? That's what that Gemara seems to say pretty clearly. And these Jewish people, they go beyond the biblical laws. They follow the rabbinic law that they even bench, even if they eat less than satisfaction. And they eat the size of an olive or an egg. So our Gemara implies like eating the size of an olive or an egg sounds like it's biblical because of broad verses. Remember the verse? It says, V'achalta, this is eating, v'savata is drinking. And what is eating? Eating is the size of a kazayas. Sounds like Reb Meir saying from the verse, from the pasuk, you need to eat a kazayas, you're obligated biblically in benching. And Reb Yehuda says the measurement for benching is an eating that could have that has satisfaction. That eating is size of an olive. So he's learning it from a pasuk. So why does Hashem say, I only said the savata would they eat and be satisfied, and they even bench when they go beyond the letter of the law? That's not beyond the letter of the law. They're translating the verse. So you have to say that the way they're translating the verse over here is called an asmachta. It's called the rabbis were looking for a source to obligate benching even for less than the size of satisfaction. And so they relied on these ways of translating the verse, depending on Reb Meir. He feels the rabbis translated it this way, and Reb Yehuda says the rabbis translated it that way. But bottom line is that they're just the rabbis that are looking for a source, what to rely on as a alternative meaning of the verse to make a special ruling, but not as that's what the verse meant. Just something to have a sort of like a base for what they're trying to say. It's hinted to maybe in the verse, but it's not the meaning of the verse. And so that's how you have to translate, at least on a simple level, that's how you would translate the this Gemara. Okay, the next Mishnah, let's try to just go through a little. Ketzad Mezamnin, what is the nusach? What is the text of the Zimun? So the Mishnah says, B'shleisha, for 3 people, Omer, you would say nevarech she'achalnu mishla. You would say, let us bless. B'shleisha v'hu, if there's 3 people plus the mezamein, the person who's leading, you have 4 people. Omer, the mezamein says, baruchu, let us bless. Because besides for him, there are 3 that can bench. So therefore, he can say baruchu and make it that they 3 are an entity in their own right, and therefore he can say baruchu, they shall bless, and not nivarech, we should bless, but he could say baruchu, they shall bless. And he's almost like he's not including himself, because he's saying you people have enough. You people, you're an entity of your own. You could bless Hashem, Baruch Hu. If he needs to join them, meaning there's only 3 altogether, then he would say nivarech, we should bless, because he needs to join them. They're not an entity of 3 of their own. Ba'asara, what happens if you have 10 people? Oimer nivarech Elokeinu. You say nivarech Elokeinu she'achalnu mishlo. Let us bless Hashem that we ate from. Ba'asara v'hu, if there's 10 plus him, Oimer, the mezamein, the person leading the benching, says Baruch Hu. He says they shall bless Baruch Hu Elokeinu Hashem she'achalnu mishaloi. And the Mishnah clarifies and says echad asara ve'echad asara riboy. It doesn't matter how many. Once you have 10, it's the same as 1,000 or 10,000. Echad asara riboy, whether 10 or whether 10 asara riboy, actually 100,000.
Why doesn't it say Baruch Hu Eloheinu? It says just Baruch Hu.
It means Elokeinu. It means Elokeinu. It's automatic, but it's emphasizing that it's just Baruch. It's emphasizing the Baruch Hu versus the Nevarech. So the Mishnah says another opinion. B'meya with 100. Hu Omer Nevarech Hashem Elokeinu. You say Hashem Elokeinu. B'meya v'hu, if there's 100 plus the mezamein, the person leading, Omer, he says Baruch Hu, and Hashem Elokeinu, of course, Hashem Elokeinu, she'achalnu mishaloi. Let us bless Hashem our God. So again, you're adding Hashem to 100. This is an alternative view, that you add Hashem, and if it's 100, you say Nivarech. 100 plus him is Baruch Hu. Be'elef, for 1,000, you say Be'elef Hu Omer. If there's 1,000 people, say Nivarech la Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael. You add another name of Hashem. Okay, the God of Israel. Be'alefahu, and if it's 1,000 plus the mazamin, Omer, he says, Baruch Hu, they shall bless Hashem our God, and Beriboy, if you have 10,000, Omer, you're saying Nevarech LaHashem Elokeinu Elokei Yisrael Elokei Tzavakos Yoshev Apruvim. So you add these other descriptions of Hashem, the God of legions, Yoshev Apruvim, who dwells in the by the cherubs, for the Alamazin Shachalnu Mishaloi, for the food. Beriboy Vahu, if he has 10,000 plus the mezamein plus the person leading, Omer, he says Baruch Hu, the same thing. Baruch Hu, they shall bless, and uses all those terms. Hashem, Elokeinu, Elokei Yisrael, Elokei Tzavakos, Yoshev Apruvim, Alamazin Shachalnu Mishaloi. Now, what do the people answer? The same way he says the bracha, that's how they answer after him. Baruch Hashem Elokeinu, Elokei Yisrael, Elokei Tzavakos, Yoshev Apruvim, Alamazin Shachalnu. So the mezamein, what does he answer after they say their thing? I'm sorry. The people that are listening, what do they answer after the mezamin says his thing? They answer Baruch Hashem Elokeinu, Elokei Yisrael, Elokei Tzavakos, Yoshev Apruvim, Alamazin Shachalnu. Okay, and the Mishnah now says the reason why you differentiate between the amount of people. Rabbi Yezaglili says it's because the amount, the majority of people, the measure of the people, that's how much you bless. As it says, but in groups, Baruch Hu Elikim Hashem Kol Yisrael, which implies that depending on the size of the group, you have different wordings. In different groups, in multiple, Baruch Hu Elikim. You should bless Hashem in all the different types of groups, meaning that each of the different groups have a different nusach for a different text for the benching. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Mamad Rabbi Akiva says, explaining his view was the first view that once you have 10, you don't change the nusach. Mamad Sinu Bebeis HaKnesses, Echad Merubin V'Echad Muatim, Aimer Baruch Hu Es Hashem, just like in a shul, that when they do Baruch Hu, they don't make a difference if there's 10. Once you have a minyan, you have a minyan. And the same thing applies to benching, that you wouldn't make a difference whether you have 10 or whether you have 10,000. Rabbi Kiva explains his view. Okay, Rabbi Shmuel says that Baruch Hu Es Hashem Hamavayrach, that the nusach of Baruch Hu is not Baruch Hu Es Hashem, like Rabbi Akiva said, but Rabbi Yishmael says, by the way, you got it wrong, Rabbi Akiva. It's Baruch Hu Es Hashem Hamavayrach, which is how we do it. Baruch Hu Es Hashem Hamavayrach, blessed is Hashem who is blessed. So we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. See you later this afternoon, Mr. Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.